Hello, this is Sam Mihara. I was a prisoner at a World War II camp at Hart Mountain, Wyoming. I am now a national speaker on the topic of mass imprisonment. During the Tadaima series on the First Elders program, I spoke about my experience having gone through the process of removal from San Francisco and being placed at this remote camp in Wyoming. In that talk, I mentioned briefly that my father became blind in the camp. And today I'd like to briefly describe how he was very productive and what he did to keep busy and prepare some artifacts of significance to everyone who wondered what really happened at these camps. So this program describes the work that he did in the camp and after camp with his knowledge on how to describe to people the situation that he faced. We'll start with a short series of slides, and I'll come back again and I'll wrap up. The story begins in Japan, in the town of Matsuyama in Ehime-ken, in western Japan. The picture shows Matsuyama Castle. Only the upper class and the staff were allowed in the castle. The Miharas moved from Hiroshima across the sea to Matsuyama in 1830 and lived in Matsuyama for 5 generations. My father, Tokinobu Mihara, was born in Matsuyama in 1897. The Mihara family was a working class for many generations. Grandfather Mihara was a miso maker. Miso is soybean paste, somewhat comparable to tomato paste. And Grandpa had the vision that the way to break out of that class is to have my father become well educated. My father attended Waseda University with a major in English and a minor in Hebrew, and he was very good in English. He graduated in 1920, and he was hired by the bilingual newspaper in San Francisco, the paper called New World Sun, or in Japanese, Asahi Shimbun. He started as a writer, and he was promoted to become editor of the English section, and he was very successful. He married my mother in 1928, and I was born in 1933. The picture shows our family in about 1941. That's me with the folded arms, age about 8. My brother next to me, my father behind me, my mother standing to the right, and Grandpa and Grandma Mihara seated. Our family was in a very comfortable 3-story Victorian house in the heart of Japantown. There was a gymnasium in the back and a multi-purpose room on top of the gym. Early in his working career, Dad was diagnosed with early stages of glaucoma of his eyes. and he was under the care of a specialist in San Francisco who maintained his eyesight for 20 years. That is, eyesight until 1942, with President Roosevelt signing the Executive Order 9066 and Lieutenant General John DeWitt ordering Japanese removed from the West. Our family had to abandon the house, and we were shipped to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. We lived in a single room, 20 feet by 20 feet, with no utilities, no water, no electricity except for a single light bulb in the ceiling. We were surrounded by barbed wire fence. There were 9 guard towers. There were floodlights and sentries on the guard towers carrying long-range rifles. On medical skills in the camp, there were 3 optometrists and no optical surgeons, no ophthalmologists. And Lieutenant General DeWitt would not allow my father to visit his specialist in San Francisco. So I watched as my father became blind, never to see again. This is a photo of our family in front of the barrack. We were in block number 14, barrack number 22, and room number C, like Charles. That's me in a white shirt. In this picture, I was about 11 years old. My brother in a sweater, my mother standing on the left, and her sisters, my 3 aunts, and an uncle. In the camp, my father learned Braille. Braille is a series of raised dots on heavy paper. So each set of 6 dots can be varied. So each pattern indicates a letter of the alphabet. He mail ordered Braille books, and he became proficient in writing and reading Braille stories in English. Now that he mastered Braille in English, he figured out there is a demand for Braille for Japanese blind people. So he hired a skilled craftsman in the camp and gave instructions to create a Japanese Braille board. The picture is the original Braille board that was made in camp. You can see that there are the simplest version of the Japanese alphabet. Starting in the upper left corner, you'll see the letter A, and the next is E, and the next is U, next is E, and the next is O, A, E, U, E, O. A is represented by 1 dot, E by 2 dots, U by 3 dots, and so forth. So that is the design that he created. And that is his signature on the very bottom, Mihara Tokinobu. And I remember he used this board to teach other blind people in the camp, in our room. This artifact was donated to the Heart Mountain, Wyoming Foundation last year. But Dad wanted to keep busy and be creative using his knowledge. So he went into writing and teaching. In the camp, with the help of a secretary, he wrote a dictionary. He wrote an English to Japanese dictionary containing 30,000 words. And it's all in English characters. So you look up a word in English, and there is a corresponding definition and the equivalent Japanese word written in English. So the market is for English-speaking people who want to learn and speak Japanese without memorizing lots of Japanese characters. A collection of Japanese words with no sentence structure is not useful for speaking because in Japan, there are strict rules on proper sentence structure. So my father created another book, a textbook on how to create proper structure in speaking and writing the Japanese language. In the summer of 1945 at camp, my father decided that it was time to leave the camp. But San Francisco was too hostile, in his opinion, with the hate that still existed. And so he decided we should move to Salt Lake City. To provide income, he opened a store in downtown Salt Lake City on Southwest Temple Street, a block from the Mormon Temple, and close to the heart of the small Japantown. Our store featured Oriental gifts, books, and stationery. And I was a teenager. After several years, the store did not do too well, and the mother convinced father it's time to go home. So in 1948, we moved back to San Francisco, back to our large house. Now, financially, this was a very difficult situation. My dad had no income. He had large expenses, and his skills were limited, not being able to see, certainly not in the newspaper business. So what he did was take steps to survive. He had the extended family move in with us. So that's in the picture. That's Grandma Mihara next to Dad. She's now the widow. On the left are Grandpa and Grandma Yoshimura, which is grandparents on my mother's side. Then my mother in the middle. And that's me in the back and my brother next to me. And we're standing right in front of our large Victorian house. My dad went further. He rented the entire first floor to another tenant. He modified the living room in our second floor and converted that to a dental office. He converted the basement of the house into a wholesale book and magazine distributor business. And he modified the community room on top of the gymnasium into a school. Then my father visualized another business opportunity. Open a school and teach English to Japanese people. One of the most popular classes was for World War II war brides from Japan. These war brides spoke very little English, and they wanted to learn to speak English and to become US citizens. So he created a new book on how to become a US citizen. Then he wrote his last book, the fourth book, which is an autobiography of his life as a blind person who survived, who provided for his family, and learned how to be independent and travel around the world. After I finished college at Berkeley, I became well established on a career in engineering. I would talk with my father, and he was very pleased with our family's progress and his accomplishments. My brother went into the family business of retail books and stationery and gifts. My father passed away in 1977, 11 years before President Reagan gave an apology in 1988. It would be very fitting and appropriate if he were able to live to see that apology. But despite his handicap, Dad met his goals in life. He took care of his family and he helped others who needed help. A truly great legacy he left for us and many people in the world. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for watching. We at Heart Mountain want to share as much as possible about the work that we're doing. This story about the Braille board and my father's efforts has been written up. It'll be published in an article at the next copy of the Heart Mountain magazine. And we would be happy to send all of you a copy free. And it's very simple. If you'll look at my website, www.sammihara.com, on the front page, you'll see a place for leaving a message, and just give me your name and a mailing address, and simply say, please send a newsletter, a magazine. So again, thank you for your attention. Hopefully that we'll meet again, and everybody keep up the good work. Thank you. Thank you all.
My name is Nancy Ukai, and today we're going to be interviewing Sam Mihara on behalf of 50 Objects, the Tadaima Pilgrimage, and all of this is supported by the National Park Service. The topic of our talk today is Tokinobu Mihara's Braille board, which was made at Heart Mountain during World War II. And we're very pleased to have Sam Mihara, Tokinobu's son, with us today. So in the short time we have, we would like to share 3 artifacts from the Mihara family history. The Tokinobu Mihara Braille board, which was made at Heart Mountain, a photo of the Heart Mountain Hospital, where so much of the family emergencies took place, and a family portrait. So Sam, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This is your father and his signature, and also an article about him and his work, because he actually came to Japan, came to the United States after he graduated from college. And you had talked earlier about his background, but it isn't just the Braille board, but he had published books. He took photographs before the war, going around Northern California and taking pictures of families engaged in the floral industry. And I just wanted to ask your general impression about your father's productivity growing up with him in San Francisco and your family.
Sure. Much later in my life, I began to realize what sacrifices that my father made. And I didn't understand at the time it happened back in World War II, his drive, his initiative to try to make a satisfying life for the family and for others, that he felt compelled to do what he did. And I didn't fully appreciate that until much later in my life, when it started dawning on me about all the things that he did. To put it in a summary form, he was being treated for his glaucoma well before the camp in San Francisco. and he was seeing a specialist who was able to maintain his eyesight, a ophthalmologist who had very skilled procedures in order to for him to continue looking, being able to see. But once he went to camp, there was no one who can help him, and General DeWitt would not let him go back to San Francisco to see his specialist. And as a result, my father went blind in camp. I watched him as in the process of his sight being diminished and getting to a point where he was totally without sight. And but then I started noticing that right away he became very productive. He didn't want to just be depressed and commiserate and let the world take care of him, as opposed to him doing something about it. And it turned out he kept very busy. And first and foremost, he wanted to take care of the family, and then he wanted to help others. And so he started in the camp by, with the help of a skilled craftsman, making this Braille board and teaching people. I remember blind students coming into our barrack room and my father teaching him using this Braille board. Then after that was completed, he started writing books. He started with this dictionary. I remember he had a secretary who came to our barrack room and they would translate from English into Japanese, and he wrote this textbook. It's all in English, so it's designed for people who speak English to learn and to speak Japanese. And he continued on writing about how to properly structure a sentence in Japanese, because a collection of words means nothing in the spoken language. The Japanese have a very strict rules on grammar.
Sam, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So yeah, in a nutshell, then what he did is he wrote that book, on a textbook on how to write proper Japanese, and then he wrote a book on helping war brides obtain citizenship, and then his ultimate was to write an autobiography. It's about his life being blind, and he wanted to tell the world about what it was like. And he wrote this book with a white cane on a red cover, and it was titled "Relying on a White Cane." So it's the story of his life being blind. So all of that being productive on top of his maintaining an income for the family, so we can continue living. So he created a business which my brother took over, but it's in the books and gift store business in San Francisco. So in a way, looking back, he was really amazing that he was so productive in spite of his huge handicap that he developed inside the camp. And that was it. I just want to summarize that.
No, thank you. That's really important. I just wonder, how was his sight when he entered Heart Mountain?
Well, I remember he was able to see. He was wearing glasses at one point, but he was able to see. And I believe the sequence was the right eye went first, and then his left eye diminished to the point where he didn't even have to use. I mean, he didn't use glasses. He just became blind. And that at that point he learned Braille, English Braille. And
well,
so
this here, this is the board which he had developed his own style, which he called a new style of Japanese Braille, and he conceived of this system. I was so moved by the beautiful craftsmanship. I think he must have collaborated with someone very closely, because there's a lot of information on it, in addition to the very, here is the board, and so you can see how big it is with your brother Nob in San Francisco. But if you look at the detailed work, it's extremely beautiful, including the fact that for each of the Japanese kana, there are drilled holes, and then in each drilled hole, there's a small piece of wood that's inserted in there, like a small peg, which someone could feel and then learn the Braille. And you said that people would come into the barrack. Was there anything to read, or were people just learning to feel the bumps on the board?
I vaguely recall the students coming in and he would guide them using the board and learn how to feel these raised dots, the patterns. And if you can imagine, you have pegs inside of a hole, you could close your eyes and feel the pattern. Like you see in the detail there, the one dot in the upper left corner being raised, you can feel that. And that is a symbol for the first letter in the alphabet, which is ah. And so that's the system that he developed.
Okay. Did you know the craftsman, or do you remember that person?
No, I vaguely remember somebody helping, but I can't even picture his face. I don't know who he was. Yeah.
According to the Heart Mountain, according to the National Archive files about your father at Heart Mountain, there were 4 or 5 people at Heart Mountain who were blind, and I believe that maybe they were the ones your father was helping to learn his new system.
That makes sense, because I remember this, one at a time they would come in and he would be teaching. So I just can't recall who they were or their names or faces. Yeah.
This is now the hospital at Heart Mountain, which is being preserved, and the Heart Mountain Wyoming Foundation is doing such an incredible job of preservation. And it's, when you look at it now, and I've heard you speak there, but you remember in the days in 1942 to 1945, when your grandfather was also there, ill with cancer. In your book, you talk about that, visiting him. Did you go with your father? Did your family go together to visit your grandfather?
Oh yes, I clearly remember going and seeing grandfather very frequently and watching him, and it was horrible watching his body literally disappear because of lack of nutrition. Winding up within a matter of a few months to skin and bones. It was unsightly, and I had no idea that a person would turn into what looks like I call it a Holocaust survivor. It just was a horrible experience. I don't wish that on anybody, because that was terrible, and that there was no need for it. And I looked at his medical records, and they were not giving him the proper treatment. In terms of common knowledge is that first if they can't eat, you could give them intravenous feeding to try to get them to survive, and they did none of that. The worst is that they were giving him a laxative to keep his system clean, for cancer of all things, and that told me a lot about the quality of the medical care that we had. By the way,
Colon cancer. It was colon cancer.
Yeah, it was colon cancer, and all of the medical staff, except for the administrator, all the medical staff were local Japanese inside the camp. So we had no specialists treating all the various problems that we had in the camp.
How old were you, Sam?
Well, I went in at 9 and came out at 12, and when my grandfather died, I was about 11-ish, somewhere in that area.
Were you able to say goodbye to him?
Oh yes, very, very sobering time. The last visit I had with him, where he was still conscious, and he asked me to come close, and I went up to him, and he said, "Shake my hand." And so as we shook hand, it turned out he put a quarter into my hand. I'll never forget. And he said, take care and use this for what you'd like. And that's all I can give you at the moment. So goodbye. And it was very sobering. Never forget that event.
I looked at part of your father's autobiography, and he said that your father was 72 years old. He'd lived in the United States for almost 40 years. And he said, exactly 1 year to the day before the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan in 1945, my father died. And today is August 7th, so it's been 76 years since your grandfather died of colon cancer at this hospital. It's very sobering, and I thank you for sharing that.
And of course, what's important, Nancy, is the lesson learned out of all this. Just because you have a hospital, and some people will say, well, you had a hospital, what's wrong with that? And the answer is everything's wrong with it if you don't have the proper staffing to take care of the various illnesses that happen inside. Even prisoners of today in a regular detention facility get far better treatment than we had during World War II. And there's really no excuse. It was inhumane and should not have happened. And hopefully it never happen again.
Was your father also treated at this hospital for his eye problems?
Well, I remember he went to the outpatient clinic, but I later learned that there were no specialists. So it really didn't help. And that was proven with the very final step where finally the government allowed him to go to a hospital in Montana where supposedly there was a specialist, and at which point I read the report where he was declared blind too late. They could have at least, General DeWitt could have made some exceptions for people with problems, especially in the case of blind people or near blind people. They need help, and he should have allowed them to go back. Besides, what can blind people do or near blind people do in the way of sabotage and espionage? It just no common sense at all, and no inhumane, no humanity concerning the decisions that were made during World War II.
So basically, was it the case that he was losing his eyesight completely without treatment while you were living in the barrack?
Well, I recall he had some eye drops. I guess the specialist in San Francisco at least was able to send some eye drop medication. But in those days, eye drops were really not effective for glaucoma. They don't have medication like they do today. And I learned later on that it took a special skill, a surgery, to maintain the pressure in the eye and or stabilize it to maintain your eyesight and keep your optical nerves from dying. So it takes a physical appearance there at the facility in San Francisco or something similar to that in order to cure the problem that he had.
So you and your brother were what, 11 and 13 or something like that?
Right.
And did he talk to you about his malady, and did he prepare you? How was the family conversation? Because you were living with your mother and your father in the barrack, and then your grandmother and grandfather, before he died, were in a separate block.
I'm sorry, so what was the question?
I just wondered if your father talked to you, the two sons, about his deteriorating health.
I don't recall that we talked much about the conditions and what could have been done or should have been done. My father was not much different than many others who took an attitude that it can't be helped. The government made decisions, and we have to follow along. And it's really a shame that the first generation didn't, in general, was not more aggressive in resistance. We only had 3 people who had the initiative to take steps, and that is, of course, everyone knows, or everyone who knew should know, that Korematsu, Hirabayashi, and Yasui were the 3 who felt strongly about their rights and took steps to resist. And unfortunately, most of the Japanese who were immigrants didn't learn that in Japan. When they came across, they just simply assumed that the government is always right, and And that's not right. And I don't think you'll find that today. Young people today know better, and that's good.
Well, somehow your father did manage to look at his situation in a very kind of clinical and practical way and started to prepare for this Braille board. He wrote books after he became blind, and he had been so active as a journalist before he lost his eyesight. And he's obviously implanted in you, Sam, the same kind of desire to educate, I think, and communicate.
Well, I think so, and I hope it was part of the genes in our family. The sad news is it took so I waited so long in my life in order to discover that this is something that's very important. I didn't realize it until I was asked about 10 years ago to give a speech about what happened, and that's when it dawned on me that so many people in this country don't know the real truth about what really happened during this terrible time during World War II against 120,000 people. And so education to me is so important, and to make sure that it really doesn't happen again. People need to understand the facts of what really happened, make sure that something similar doesn't happen to other groups, other people. Very, very important.
You've done a tremendous amount of work. You've won the Paul A. Gagnon History Prize from the National Council on History Education. You've spoken before Harvard Law School, Columbia Law School, and many universities, high schools, groups. I wondered when the first time you actually revisited the camp. You said you just 10 years ago started to speak, which I find astonishing. The slide up now is of your family barrack in relation to where the hospital is. And when did you go back to Heart Mountain for the first time after 1945?
Well, it was interesting. For a long time, I did not want anything to do with Wyoming. All I remember, it was a terrible time in my life, and one doesn't want to associate with a bad part of one's history, and so I stayed away. But I had heard that there was some activity going on to try to restore the camp, and about maybe about 15 years ago, I was on a tour. A bus tour going from North Dakota to Yellowstone, and then and riding on that tour, one of the stops was Cody, Wyoming, and I vaguely remember I said, "Oh, Cody, that was a little town that was 15 miles from Heart Mountain. I wonder if we can go out and look at it." And so I asked the tour guide, since we're going to be there overnight, can I just get off and rent a car and go see what's going on? And so that's what I did, and I was met by a lady. Her name turned out to be LaDonna Zoll, and she was a really bright lady local resident of Wyoming, who took me on a tour and showed me exactly where Block 14 was, and other facilities that remain, or remnants of the facilities. And that was my first return to Heart Mountain. So it was very, very memorable, and I'm glad I did that. I wish I'd done that earlier, but so be it.
So we could talk to you for hours, but I just wanted to end on this slide, which shows your family who are at Heart Mountain. And do you want to, okay, so your grandfather, Tsunegoro Mihara, is on the left. And of course, you talked very movingly about his being ill with cancer at the hospital and dying there in 1944. Next to him is Tsune, and you shared a slide with me of her sitting in front of her barrack. Did they build that garden?
Yes, that's Grandma, and right in front of her barrack, and Grandpa built this rock garden. A very interesting piece of art, and took this photograph. So I don't know if the photograph was taken after he passed away or before. I don't have a date on it, but it certainly was during that time frame, and it was right in front of their barrack.
And then in this photograph, there's you and your brother, Nob, and you with your father, and he has his hands around you. It's so sweet. And your mother. Can you just tell us a little bit about your mother? Because it must have been very difficult for her to be, running the family, trying to help support the family when your father lost his eyesight.
Oh yes, my mother is the literally the unspoken heroine of the family. She had to do many tasks. She had to take care of the family after my father became blind, to take care of him, help run the family business, which is helping provide some income in order for us to survive. Um, so all of that effort, she worked hard and didn't complain. And my memory of her is a very devoted mother who worked hard to try to keep keep the family going. She owes a lot more recognition than she received during her lifetime.
And what was her name, Sam?
Well, her Japanese name was Sueko, but my father, being very religious and a Christian, he named her Esther, renamed her Esther. And by the way, that's where I got my first name. My Samuel is actually my middle name. And my brother's given name was Nobuo, but he also had a middle name called Joshua. So you'll notice all these names are from the Old Testament. My father was very religious, and that's how we found the American names for our family.
Well, this photograph was taken, I think you said around 1940, so a year or two before the removal from San Francisco, and then your family returned to San Francisco. Would you just like to say, so when you returned to San Francisco, you were 13. What was
Right.
that
No,
like?
actually, when I went to San Francisco, we went by way of Salt Lake City. So we were in Salt Lake City for about 3 years, from 45 to 48. So we finally wound up returning home in about 1948.
And what was it like to finally return to California?
Well, obviously, my mother was very pleased. She really wanted to be home. This is her home. Grandma liked it, and the rest of the family enjoyed it. So yeah, we all wound up back home in 1948. It worked out okay.
And when your father passed away, I believe, what year was that, Sam?
I had forgotten. It was somewhere around. My guess is about 1978-ish. It was around 10 years, as I recall. But I'm not accurate on my history of that date. But he died before. What was significant? He died before the um, redress bill was signed in 1988, and so he did not receive the apology letter. My mother did; she was still living, but my father did not. Yeah.
And I believe you said that in a book that you wrote that your father didn't leave a will, or he had the Braille board. That was one of his pieces in his legacy.
Right. My father, I learned later on that he left no will, and one basic reason is he had nothing to give. He had his Braille board, he had the books, but he had given away all of his possessions otherwise. And my mother and my father were living in I don't know what you call it, a seniors type apartment in San Francisco, and and they also left a collection of family swords. We had a collect, like most families. We had our family of swords, but that was about it. Yeah, I asked my mother about, is there a will, and she said no, because we have nothing to give. So be it.
So this Braille board, what has happened to it now? Because it's an incredibly interesting artifact that's a very important part of the world of American history. Can you tell us what you've done with it?
Well, my brother and I talked about it. We both wanted to do something because it's been going around touring and in museums and so forth. And my brother was physical custodian, being in San Francisco. But we decided it's about time. Let's give it a permanent home, and we decided to donate it to the Heart Mountain Foundation, and that's where it was sent about a year ago. And it's been on display right at the heart of the learning center they have built at Heart Mountain.
Well, I think it's an incredible embodiment of your father's spirit, of the situation that he was in when it was created, and also of interest to anybody who's interested in the history of Braille. You talked about resistance, but in his own way, your father found a way to get through this tragedy to his family, losing his eyesight, and creating this incredible thing that's a physical legacy that will continue, people will continue to research it and learn from it and from him. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for helping set this up, Nancy. I really appreciate it. And if I can quickly mention, those who are interested in more information, obtaining a copy of my presentation, which I give all over the country, please look at my website, www.sammihara.com. Thank you again. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.